This evening on The Rock Newman Show, he was a hip-hop intellectual, successful entrepreneur, and an agent of social change. We're talking about rapper Nipsey Hussle, whose vision and streetwise ways captured the attention of a generation. We'll look at the life, art, and mission of a hip-hop marathon man and a rising star taken away from us much too soon. That's coming up right now on The Rock Newman Show. Welcome to The Rock Newman Show from the campus of historic Howard University, located right here in the nation's capital. I'm Rock Newman, and it is my desire to inspire you with personal stories of extraordinary achievement. This evening, we pay tribute to the late Nipsey Hussle, whose latest CD, Victory Lap, was rising on the charts, who built a thriving cultural ecosystem in the Crenshaw neighborhood of Los Angeles and finding success with his marathon store and clothing line. Tonight, we'll talk about his many accomplishments and what his loss means to his fans and others who only learned about him after his death. Joining me in this exploration are my guests, Risikat Okedeyi, cultural architect and professor at Bowie State College, Chris Richards, pop music critic at the Washington Post, and Tony Lewis Jr., author of Slug, A Boy's Life in the Age of Mass Incarceration. Folks, welcome to The Rock Newman Show. Tonight, I want to hold this photo up because it says something very special. It says, honoring our brother. I wanted to do this show because about 7 years ago, it came to me, I had the inspiration to want to pursue an opportunity to help change a narrative, what I think is much too often a negative narrative about African American life in America. And I was 60 years old when that inspiration came. Nipsey Hussle was in his 20s when he got the inspiration to be an example for generations to come to change negative ways into more positive ways. So I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Before I get to my guests, we have a video and it's called Long Live Nipsey. Let's take a look.
First of all, my condolences and my respect to Nipsey and his family. It's so unfortunate when you look at a guy who talked about how he wanted to give back to his own community, actually gave back to his community, and actually stayed in his community. There's not many who's done that. And to see his life taken away from him in his community by someone that come from his community, it's one of the most unfortunate events that's happened in American history.
Nipsey Hussle, Ermias Ascodum. To us, he's our family. He's our brother. He's our cousin, he's our family, he's our brother, he's our everything, you feel me?
The same way that he reps Eritrea, we're repping the same thing, because, you know, yeah.
Basically, as being an Eritrean in the diaspora, we aren't represented, like we're too African for the Americans and we're too American for the Africans. So we're kind of just stuck in this middle area, and he kind of brought us out there and showed us we don't have to be doctors, we don't have to be lawyers. You just have to know what you want to do with your life and do it.
He gave back to us. He gave back to, look at the city. You see how many people came out for him, you know, and that made us realize, like, dang, like, if he can do it, then the youth can do it. And stop the gang violence, too.
He was a whole legend out here. He done brought the whole hood together.
Hey, man, we live on Crenshaw and Slauson, man, going up for the life And then, you know what I'm saying, all the love that people got for Nipsey Hussle, man, we gonna miss you, bro. It's gonna affect all of us because it could have been us. Look where I'm at, bro. I'm right here with my people like I should be. Nip was right here with his people like he should be. That man went away in front of his store, man. That's a bad way. But like I said, look what he did, bro. He woke everybody up, man. Sad a man gotta close his eyes so the rest of the world can wake up, man. The marathon continues, bro. Victory lap, man. Kind of want to tear up right now, but yeah, like, real, bro. Love you, man. Miss you, man. You ain't gone. You right here with us, and we out here with you, bro.
On behalf of an extremely grateful city who can never, ever pay back to you what you all gave to us, I want to, again, thank you. And we extend to you a very small honor in renaming Slauson and Crenshaw Nipsey Hussle Square. And today, we adjourn our regular business in the memory of your son, Ermias Aspagan. Thank you all so much.
Welcome to you guys. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy evening to join us.
Thank you for having me.
You are described as a culturalist.
Yes.
I would like for you to help me with something.
Okay.
Prince died a couple of years ago. Beloved, known throughout the world, admired.
Yes.
As just a creative genius. Nipsey died 1 month ago. There is a difference in how people react
Yes.
to the giant and international icon Prince and how they act to Nipsey.
Yes.
Prince, one of the greatest musicians, entertainers in the history of the world.
Yes.
Nipsey, not nearly as well known, but the depth of feeling is perhaps much stronger. Can you please explain?
I think so I was one of the people that was not really, I knew Nipsey Hussle by name, but didn't really know his music. And when I got the breaking news alert, excuse me, on my, I'm a little emotional. When I got the breaking news alert on my phone, I knew, I could feel something really, there was something really palpable, and it was all over. My heart got really, really heavy. And as I started to research and just learn more about what he was doing, and I started to understand the presence that he had created in his neighborhood and the decision to stay there. In the spiritual community, there's a term that we use called light workers, and Nipsey Hussle was a light worker. And so what I found was that I was reacting to the sense of the depth of someone being snatched away so violently, but also someone who had come back to this world to do a specific job, which was to empower his community. He was doing the work. He had stayed, and I think that's a big reason why people are responding. Prince, at my age, he's part of my soundtrack for my life.
Sure.
So, the mourning that you have for Prince is a bit different because it's a sense of your childhood being lost. But I think when we think about how insane the world is, and you have someone who's made a decision to stay active in his community and to build up his community, not just give money from afar. There is this palpable sense that we've lost someone that really, really is important. And not that Prince wasn't important, but the way that Nipsey was taken, the fact of all of the things he was saying. If you look at his interviews across the board, this man was committed to love and his community. He said, my music is for the people in my hood. That's what I'm doing. And for them to be able to touch this brother, to have access to him, to know that when they went into Marathon, they were supporting this black man, to know that he was building all these other things, coding for children, barbershops and all this stuff, and hiring people that had previously been unhireable. You feel that, and you understand the depth of that is big. And so I think for a lot of us who are responding, who weren't even familiar with his music, it's not just about him as a musician, it's about him as a light worker, someone who had committed himself in a way that was not just aspirational, he was actually doing it.
I asked you a very genuine question that I had, and you gave an absolute fantastic answer. So
thank you.
Thank you very much. If I might say before I go to Chris, that I'm a R&B and Motown guy. Marvin Gaye and Otis Redding and Wilson Pickett and Aretha Franklin.
Yes.
And I didn't know a lot about, I heard his name like you. I didn't know a lot about Nipsey. Like you, when I read about him, it was a powerful pull on me to want to pay tribute. Part of that came from my sadness was obviously would be for his family,
Right.
the grief that they're going through.
Right.
But something that was taken away at 31 years old, at 31 years of age, that you knew was just getting started. He had just stepped into his greatness.
Yep.
I couldn't help but imagine him at 50 years old, him at 60 years old, and the potential impact that he could have had on the world. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, the potentiality is staggering and stunning. Here you have this guy who was very much fighting against the injustice and unfairness and insensibility of the world, and the tragedy of his life being taken from him feels so unfair and unjust and insensible. I think that's why it was such a resonant story, and I think so many people invested in his music after the fact, if you will. But the thing that really blew me away about the first wave of digital grieving that I think we saw on social media was that people were very quick to say, you know, Nipsey Hussle was so much more than a rapper.
Yeah.
Absolutely true. He was an activist, he was a community entrepreneur, he was someone very much trying to improve the circumstances, you know, that brought him up for other people. But then I think the reminder that sort of maybe came in the second waves of grieving was that every rapper is more than a rapper. There's a humanity to artists, and that's what we're listening to when we hear this music. So while we talk about all these incredible deeds that he did outside of his music, I think, you know, light work is a term that I'm learning today. But I mean, I think light work is it's a part of musicality. It's something that's expressed, and I think so much of Nipsey Hussle's humanity was in his music, and people are able to connect with that. If you aren't able to connect with his legacy directly in terms of, you know, what he's doing in the Crenshaw district of South Los Angeles, no matter where you are on this planet, you can tap into his humanity through the songs he's left behind as well.
Yeah. Tony Lewis Jr.
Yes, sir.
You've written the book Slug. You deal with mass incarceration and children of of those who have been incarcerated.
Yes, sir.
So therefore, you have dealt with a lot of issues surrounding the dynamics of gangs, belonging to a gang, getting out of a gang. Sure. Before we talk about getting out of a gang, Nipsey was obviously in a gang. Yeah. I'd like for you to talk to us for a moment about the lure of gang life. What's the lure?
Yeah, you know, so like here in DC, we have more we call crews.
Crews, sure.
But the dynamics are pretty similar.
Yes.
And most young people growing up in communities like I grew up in, like communities like Nipsey grew up in, that's part of the culture. That's the fabric of the community. So it's part of it is it's alluring, but it's also cultural. And a lot of people are born into those gangs or those crews, even when they don't want to be in them. And so I think in every community across the world, right, human beings do what they see. And so when that's so present in your community, and that's the way of life, that's kind of what you do. You know, on Victory Lap, Nip makes he got a lyric, and forgive me if it's misquoted in some way, but he says, you know, third generation gangbanger, right, and live long enough to see it changing, right? So it's part of he was explaining sort of that backdrop, right? I'm a third generation gang member, so meaning that those before him were in a gang, right? And so I think for many young men of color in this country, that's the reality. So it's not just choosing it. The tough part becomes choosing something else. And I think his ultimately, I think that's what he wanted to do, create a legacy that could say that you could pivot from that. Even if you are in a gang or you come from that culture, that you can pivot and become a businessman, an activist, a philanthropist, and a lot of those things.
Of all of us sitting here at this table, you're probably best qualified because you've dealt with it more. But part of what I want to try to impart to our viewing audience here, to the best of our ability, is what are the challenges from leaving that thug life, from leaving that gang life? How difficult is that? I have heard from others who obviously this table wouldn't accommodate today, you put your life on the line when you make a change. It can be a matter purely speaking and simply speaking of life and death.
Yeah, it can be definitely detrimental to walk away. I think what Nip was trying to do was he wasn't trying to walk away from his gang though. He was trying to elevate his gang. He was trying to change the dynamics of what being in a gang meant, and really showing that gang members have infinite potential, right? And so they're not just bad guys. That there are other forces that play a part in young men of color, you know, banding together to protect themselves from immediate violence from other rival gangs, but also state violence in a way. And I think we can't lose context of that. And you know, the reality of it is far too many of young men in this country are falling prey to gangs, not gangs in sense of the gang is bad, but falling to the lack of opportunity that are in the communities, right? And they want to figure their way out and survive, and it takes on a life of its own. And I think that's what we have to be honest about all across this country. How do we create opportunities and access that young men and women in our country can make better decisions?
Chris, I don't want to put you in a position to speak for all white folks. But I want to ask you, because there's a palpable disconnect. There is a real lack of understanding by many in the media and many white people. Yeah, he was a gangbanger, and you know, look at the tattoos. There is a disconnect there. So first, I'd like to see if I can get you to explain maybe some of the voices that you've heard that express those kinds of thoughts. First, let's do that.
Sure. I mean, as a music critic, I feel that I have to make a point that seems self-evident to me, but not to the world at large, which is first and foremost that rap music is the dominant mode of popular music on this planet in this century. You know what I mean? There's still this idea that it's something else. It's pop, it's rock. Rap music is the sound of society, of this species. Globally. Right. It's crazy to me that point needs to be reiterated to people constantly, but I'm happy to say it over and over again because it's absolutely the truth.
Do you find just real knee-jerk reaction to that on the regular basis?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a huge part of the Washington Post readership that doesn't want to hear it. I think obviously race is a fundamental part of it. Some of it might be generation as well. You know, older readers might not want to see the music of their time obsolesced by this new form that they don't feel that they can understand. The argument that I'm making always is that rap music, if you weren't raised in a black community, in a culture that listened to it, any kind of music really, it's an empathetic opportunity. It's an opportunity to hear someone share their life experience with you for free. You know what I mean? And you can learn how other people live in this world. So if there is such a thing as the hip hop generation, that's what I hope the legacy of it is that we're listening to each other as human beings. In terms of Nipsey Hussle's music, I thought it was just so fascinating. He has this song with YG, a fellow Los Angeles rapper, called FDT. The DT stands for Donald Trump, and we'll let your viewers figure out what the F stands for. It was a song from 2016, and how many years are we now into the Trump administration? 2 years. This is still the most direct rebuke of Donald Trump's politics in pop music. Still, 3 years standing, you know? So that's an example of Nipsey Hussle understanding the global impact of wanting to change the world on a global scale. He's speaking directly to the hottest political topic of our time. Meantime, behind the scenes, or you know, in his own community, he's working at this level where he's helping people who are leaving incarceration get back up on their feet. He's helping people struggling with income to build up their entrepreneurial skills and help them, you know, in his neighborhood. He's working literally on his block. You know what I mean? So for an artist to be able to be addressing the state of the world in that grand scale and in that sort of just around the corner scale, the neighborhood, the micro where you came from. I mean, what a powerful model that is, and I hope that's something that people are picking up on as we continue to grieve this man and talk about his legacy. To be able to do both at the same time it's incredible to me.
You are you're a professor at Prince George Community College
Yes.
and at Bowie State College. Very nature of that is that you interact with 18 to 23, 24 year olds.
Yep.
What have you heard? What's the vibe?
The vibe really is people. I have a couple of students who were hard fast fans of Nipsey Hussle, and they are devastated. And in fact, one of the projects that we're doing in one of my it's a hip hop and visual culture class, and so they have to make a zine. And so one of the students is dedicating their entire page to Nipsey Hussle. And there was this conversation about how are you going to write about it? What do you want to talk about? He loved his music, but he also loved the legacy of stay committed to your people. And so a lot of the vibe that I'm seeing is really kind of this sense of, it's weird, there's this sense of this is the way the world is.
Yeah.
So it's not, there's an absence of emotion, and at the same time a real clarity on this is what we got to do next. So there is a sense that something really tragic has happened in the loss of this man's life, but there's also a sense of, well, this is just the way the world is. And once you move away from the conspiracy theories and you just kind of accept the fact that this man was gunned down by one of his own, there is this reality of, okay, that's tragic, but Nipsey said this is what we have to do. And so what I see is a spark in a lot of my students who are like, well, he gave us the blueprint, so we're gonna go follow that. And I think that's the beauty of the legacy. And that even for those of us that are newly discovering his work and the impact that he's making, these younger folks totally get what Nipsey was trying to do.
Yeah.
They totally understand it. And I think the beauty, what you said about just that scale of having this global impact but also having this micro impact, the thing that I love most about what we're seeing is that he showed us you can do it. It's sometimes in a lot of music we see people being aspirational. What we would like to do. Nipsey was like, all right, I'm gonna tell you what I like to do and then I'm gonna go do it. And by him doing it and people being able to see him do it, he's now created a blueprint that's better than any workforce development program that I think we could ever create on our own. Because he's showing you that it can be done. And he's also showing you, because one of the things I try to teach my students is that you have, even in your cohort of this class, there's some amazing minds. Work with the people that are here. And so I think that's another big message that they're taking away, that this is someone who saw the potential in his crew and the people around him and said, let's work together. It's not hard. Because I think sometimes it feels really hard and heavy to try to help the community. Nipsey was like, no, it's not that hard. We understand what we need to do. This is a way to think about it. And we also should understand that Nipsey Hussle in and of itself was a brilliant being. I was reading one tweet where a young man was friends with the family. At 12, he built his own computer. So he had these other aspirational goals and ideas about what he wanted to be. And I think what you say, Tony, about how sometimes you're born into this, and so the idea of choice gets kind of taken away from you. What we see is behind that is another layer. So I think they're sad, but I think they're also hopeful because they feel like they have a plan. Nipsey's given them a sense of what the next steps can be.
We have a video on materialism and building for the community. Your comments there lead us right there. Let's take a look.
Man, I feel like that's insecurity. Material things ain't nothing, you feel me? At the end of the day, it's who you is, you know? You wasn't born with it, you won't die without it. So if you feel you need some diamonds or some jewelry to get at a female, it's because you feel you lack something within yourself, you know what I mean? So all that, as far as that angle, it's like I feel that's insecurity.
Risikat, I would like to stay with you. Barack Hussein Obama burst onto the scene as a senator, and as a first-time senator ran for the presidency. And his slogan was hope. And people rallied to that slogan, rallied to his vision. Nipsey didn't necessarily have that as a slogan, but it appears to me in so much of what I have heard is that in him, people saw hope that perhaps had more substance than the two-term president of the United States.
That's quite yes, that is true, yes. And that's because, I love me some Barack, but he, his trajectory is different.
Uh-huh.
And in order for him to operate as the President of the United States, there's a lot of things I think he has to give up.
Yes.
When you see how Nipsey is presenting himself, he's not giving up anything.
Yeah.
Like authentic, and he's like, yes, I'm part of this crew, and yes, I rhyme, and yes, I'm a businessman, and yes, I'm a community leader. Like for me, none of this is a contradiction. I don't have to give up anything, and I think that's one of the reasons why his impact is going to be, it's going to be long-standing. And here's the thing: as Black people, we need a variety of examples.
Yeah.
So for some people, Barack is absolutely an attainable goal.
Sure.
And for others, Nipsey makes a lot of sense. And so I like that they could actually exist in the same spectrum of, of our lifetime. I think that I have this thing called the master slave paradigm and how it affects Black people. And there's
What's it called?
The master slave paradigm.
Uh-huh.
So it's something that I use to help my students understand the effect of the transatlantic slave trade. And what happens is you get this side effect that there can only be one Black person representing anything. Right, yeah. And it creates this skewed sensibility about what's possible. And I love that Nipsey tells to other kids, to kids who can see his path and say, that's me, that your life is possible in this way. So it's a good thing. But yes, his impact is going to be long-standing and it's going to have reach because there are a lot more kids who can identify with Nipsey Hussle in terms of their economic standing, in terms of their aspirations, than maybe the kids that love Barack. I love that they both can exist, though. I think that's the important part.
So Chris, when I talk about the hope, it's an example. He's there as a living, breathing, current example. As a music critic, who I'm assuming has studied some of his artistry, did you find that hope in his lyrics also?
I think so. And the other part I wanted to comment on is just the idea of the hope being a reciprocal gesture for him. I think in addition to
what does that mean?
In addition to his fans seeing hope in him, I think he saw hope in his listeners. And also, fans is also a word that I flinch to use here too, because I think about when people are listeners, are they consumers? Are they fanatics? Are they community members? I think Nipsey Hussle really saw his audience as his community. I met him very briefly here at Howard University on this very campus 10 years ago.
Did you say on this great campus?
It was, yes I did. Well, no, I didn't, but I should have. I said on this very campus, on this wonderful campus. I mean, it's a special place, especially special around homecoming every year when they do Yard Fest up on the yard.
Right.
It becomes the epicenter of hip hop music for those 5 hours in the afternoon. It's a concert that happens every year, and it's a place where rising stars are christened. You know, Notorious B.I.G. played there when he was coming up. Jay-Z played there when he was coming up. Kanye, Outkast. You know, it's something that launches you to the highest level. So at the time in 2009, Nipsey Hussle's music was incredibly promising, and I wanted to ask him about that. And the question was very much kind of about like star making and celebrity, and is this event going to launch him to a higher plane? And what he had to tell me was, you know, it's really in the hands of the audience. You know, I just get up there and do my thing, and then it's really up to them. And I thought that was such a wise and clear gesture, such a clear idea to have as someone in their early 20s who's trying to, you know, make it in the rap game, to understand that, you know, his resonance is entirely in the hands of the people that he's speaking to. So I don't think he really saw his listeners as fans. I think he saw them as part of his community, and I think that the hope was a two-way street. Absolutely, it's in his music. I think so much of it went from sort of like gangster rap tropes at the beginning, which are so much about survival, to transitioning to the idea of prosperity. You know what I mean? We're going to survive, and in fact, we're, you know, not only are we going to survive, but we're going to flourish. We're going to make this world a better place for the people who are coming up beneath us.
In the despair of the neighborhoods who most were fans of his music, there perhaps was no greater message for them to hear, for them to internalize, and then to look at him as an example that these aren't empty lyrics.
Right.
He's living the life.
Right.
He's talking the talk, and he's walking the walk. That takes me to, we have a video with Nipsey, Power of Thought.
One thing I notice about myself, when I like, I think, you know, thoughts is powerful in all facets. Because even my career, even my life, you know, things end up turning out exactly how I visualized them. Not in this time frame I expected. You know what I'm saying? You always want it to happen overnight. But, you know, I just had clear visions. you know, obviously outside of my grill, I just mean the music and hustling and just how I viewed myself as an adult when I was a young dude coming up. And your thoughts powerful. That, you know, come to life if you stick to your script.
Tony, your dad, Tony Lewis Sr., grew up in a world known in the DC area notoriously, drug kingpin, life in prison.
Yes, sir.
When he talks about, when you just hear Nipsey talk about the power of thought, I would really appreciate if you might be able to take us sort of in a personal place where seeing someone that you love being taken away from his family and from his community by the actions that he took. I'd like for you to share with us what that was like, because when you share with us what that was like, you are sharing the story of millions of others.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a literal statement, right? You have about 5 million children in this country that have an incarcerated parent or have had an incarcerated parent. And so I was 9 years old, my father went to prison. It's the greatest destabilizer. My father was an active father, a present father, so to have my Superman taken away and you know, not only be taken away, but be taken away forever. You know, we're 30 years into his sentence. He got life without parole. In the first 14 years of that he was shipped 3,000 miles away to a place called Lompoc, California. My mother pretty much broke mentally based as a result of that. And I was growing up in what was America's crack capital and murder capital, which is District of Columbia. And so when you talk about thoughts, the thoughts that a 9-year-old has, trying to figure out what is going on, right? Experiencing him being, prior to being sentenced, them being at Quantico Marine Base and having to visit my father at the cell and seeing them on the news every day, being flown with military helicopters and bulletproof courtrooms and being shackled and all of those things that are etched in my memory, right? And even now, as a 39-year-old father and husband, having to take my 2 beautiful little girls in the federal prison so they can have a relationship with their grandfather. It's been the gift that continues to give in the most negative way. And so a lot of my advocacy around helping children with incarcerated parents has really been stemmed from me trying to, you know, help school systems and community members, you know, identify those children for the sake of resourcing their families and supporting their families so that they can have thoughts that are positive, thoughts that can lead to positive outcomes. And I think even back to your initial question about, you know, the lure of gangs, right? When you look at our country's system of mass incarceration and the removal of so many people from the community, you don't have, you go to the gang because there's nothing else.
Tony, let me stop you there. Because you're talking about this society and this government and this system removing so many people from homes. And I want to take the time right here to address something, because it's a reality that when you really understand the essence of it, it's difficult not to be angry. James Baldwin said to be Negro in America and relatively conscious is to nearly always be in a rage. So you talk about the millions that are taken away from the families and the communities. And a very, very large percentage of those who have been taken away selling marijuana, selling weed, a large percentage that now they're in jail for long periods of time, family destroyed, community destroyed, for something that entrepreneurs now in Wall Street are starting to make billions on. Let that settle. Let that settle in. They're sitting in jail languishing. And right now there are corporations that are being heralded for their business acumen of selling weed that they sold and would put them in the prisons.
Yeah, it should be mandates. I mean, we start talking about social equity, racial equity around the marijuana industry. There should be some like hard policy around that. Particularly, you look at places like the District of Columbia, where maybe 95% of the arrests, period, have been African Americans, right? So when the marijuana industry becomes recreational or it becomes legal here, and you can have places, stores like they have in Colorado, there's no way that you shouldn't see at least 50% African American ownership. But I want to say this, not just African American ownership. I'm talking about African American ownership that represents people that have been previously incarcerated, or people that come specifically from communities that have been ravaged by the war on drugs and hyper-policing and all of these kind of things. And that, a lot of times when we start talking about somebody like Nipsey Hussle, why he the outcry has been so significant, as juxtaposed to somebody like, say, a Prince, or his comparison, you compared him to Barack Obama, that he is us. Right. Prince is just Prince a superhero, right? So right. And then Barack, the great Barack Obama, just didn't come from where many, like in communities like my fella, he don't come from where we come from. We salute him. He don't come from where we come from. Nipsey Hussle is us. So when he goes, right, and the fact that somebody could hurt him, right, that it speaks to a deeper connectivity. And but also somebody like Nipsey became also more of a bridge to Barack Obama. When he talking about he a gang member, right? And he from the hood, I'm identifying with that, but he talking about being integrated vertically, and he's talking about opening up STEM centers for young people, right? So it makes a person in my hood say, well, what's STEM? What's cryptocurrency? What's being integrated vertically, right? So then I can appreciate the contributions of, say, President Obama, if that makes sense.
Tony, you have an event coming up in a couple of weeks, May 19th, I think it is.
Sir, DC Native Day.
Huh?
DC Native Day.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so last year the Washingtonian magazine put out an ad that didn't include black people, about I'm not a tourist, I live here. So Angel Gregorio and myself, that's my home girl, a queen in this city. She owns a store called The Spice Suite. We came together and organized a counter photo shoot. We wanted to represent DC natives and DC culture, and subsequently the city council, King McDuffie, introduced a bill that we lobbied for that would create a DC Native Day. So from now to eternity, we would celebrate DC natives, but not like in a way like dinosaurs like they used to be here, but in a way like they're present and they will be a part of the future. Obviously, we want people to come out and from all walks of life. If you love a native, if you have a child by a native, if your parents were natives, right? If you respect natives, then come out and celebrate with us at Union Market area. It's going to be in front of the Union District Oyster Bar, and we're going to recreate that photo, capture that moment in time, to really celebrate natives again. We know all the forces on natives, gentrification, every problem in the city is still chocolate, right? And I think it's going to take all of us, whether you've been here 50 or 5 generations or 5 minutes, if you live in this city, I think you should be concerned about the state of the most fragile residents, because you know, we share space, and whatever happens to one of us happens to all of us.
Chris, he just talked about gentrification and people being here, whether they've been here for 5 years or 50 years or 5 minutes, having a respect for where they are and what is the history and the culture of where they now reside. You pop music critic. I know without a shadow of a doubt, Nipsey talked about gentrification and its impacts and its tensions. There's no way that you didn't pay attention to just a couple of weeks ago what was happening when the store that blared the go-go music on Georgia Avenue on Florida Avenue near Georgia and 7th Street, that you didn't pay attention to that. The new residents coming in, primarily Caucasian residents coming in, made a real frontal effort to try to stop that music that had been playing for 40 plus years, with seemingly an utter disregard for what it meant for people who are still here and what it has meant to them for generations. What was your reaction?
I was proud of the community for rising up so powerfully to speak out against what had happened. And I was disgusted that it is even a problem in the first place. Think about that very intersection. There are rooftop bars that are playing all kinds of music late into the night.
Yes.
But then the go-go music that comes from Washington, D.C. playing during daylight hours is the one that's going to become a problem that needs to be shut down. That makes no sense to me. What I would say is that become familiar with go-go culture if you haven't. I was born in DC, I grew up in Maryland, I heard it on the radio growing up, and I thought it was a national music. It took me till I became an adult here in DC to go, oh, it only exists in Washington, DC? Oh, I should go see Rare Essence at Club U, you know what I mean? Like, and that's where my go-go education began, like at 18 formally, you know? But what I say to people when they come to town, when they move here, it's the first thing I tell them to listen to, because it is the sound of this city. It is a consecrating music. It brings people together. I mean, all the cliches about it being the heartbeat of the town, it's absolutely true, and it's a tradition that is endangered. I wrote a story for the Post now, it's a few years ago at this point, but about kind of the state of go-go and how the music was pushed out of the city into Prince George's County. Then Prince George's County changed their nightlife laws to force it out of there. And now it was happening at like Sweet 16 parties and the casinos out in the distant suburbs. Go-go music is vital, it's important to the city. If it's something that sounds unfamiliar to you as a new resident, get familiar, because it's powerful, powerful stuff.
Are you, do white folks that read your column, do they want to beat you up sometimes?
I haven't gotten physical threats that I know about, but I mean, I think part of, again, my idea of listening, it's empathy, right? There are artists that speak for communities, but I think all art speaks to the world, if you will. So there's a huge empathetic opportunity that you have as a listener to tap into different sounds, whether it's jazz, go-go, hip-hop, country music, you know, and I encourage people to get out into three-dimensional space, like you're talking about shared space, like we share this city. Get out in these spaces and share this music with each other. You know, if there's something you don't understand about heavy metal, whatever, go to the concert and be around the human beings who are having their life sung back to them. And I think that's something with rap music that you really can feel. I definitely felt it at the Broccoli City Festival last year that Nipsey Hussle performed at. And I think he probably had the most powerful gesture of the entire day. This is a hip hop and R&B festival that last year was happening on the grounds of RFK Stadium. This year it moved to FedEx Field just last weekend. At the very end of the set, Nipsey played his song FDT, which we spoke about earlier, and it was on the screen of an image of Kanye West, who was wearing his Make America Great Again hat. At first it seemed like obviously a very potent gesture, very charged gesture, but when I sat back from it, I realized it wasn't really him, it wasn't Nipsey speaking out against Trump or really trying to like interrogate Kanye either. It felt more like a gesture of solidarity with the tens of thousands of people who are there in that concert audience. And again, music is an opportunity to empathize and to understand one another. That's something that I think Nipsey Hussle's legacy really is about, trying to relate to humanity writ large.
I'm gonna stay with you. Nipsey Hussle, you just talked a lot about go-go.
Right.
The godfather of go-go in this town needs no introduction. It's Chuck Brown. So after Chuck Brown passed away, at some point I said, you know, a Chuck Brown concert might be a place that one can go to a Chuck Brown concert and find a dropping of identities at the door. And when you're rocking with Chuck Brown, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, or otherwise, the song that we play at the beginning of at the start of my show is We Are One by Frankie Beverly. And at a Chuck Brown concert, as momentarily as it might have been, my sense was, being at many, is that we're one. I'd like for you to share your thoughts on Chuck Brown contrasting and comparing with a Nipsey Hussle.
Oh, it's very interesting. Both people from the community, both soundtracked lives of the communities that they came from, both created opportunities for others in their communities, and like you said, created a gathering point for those communities. I think now the situation that we're in, it's not on the go-go community or the black community in DC to make sure that white people feel welcome at the go-go. I think it's, you know, people who are outsiders to this should realize that it's a privilege to be in those spaces. That's something that I'm figuring out more and more as my life goes on, that like how grateful I am to have been welcomed into black spaces when so many black folks are not welcomed into white spaces, which is what we're seeing now, this sort of turf war over what's going on outside the Metro PCS on Florida Avenue. Is this a white space or a black space? That's what the argument essentially is going to be. but in terms of, you know, what the go-go community can do, I just want them to continue to exist, and I want this music to continue to exist and to be a gathering place. And if the go-go community chooses to welcome people from outside or new residents, what have you, then that's their gift to the new residents, honestly. And then as far as Chuck goes, I mean, his attitude was absolutely come one, come all. He was totally a welcoming presence, but he also understood that go-go stood for marginalized people in Washington, and it was this power, sort of a sense of belonging and a sense of release, honestly. I mean, these parties would go on until 4 in the morning. People had a lot of stress, from what I understand, to release in these shows. So this is all what I understand as a spectator, you know what I mean, as someone who's lucky enough to kind of become a halfway participant and listener. And I love go-go music, and I'm glad that it continues to thrive. I hope that that's what we can do as listeners, really, is protect the legacy of these artists by listening to their music, playing it in public spaces so other people can hear it. You know, play a Nipsey Hussle song in your car with the windows rolled down. Play a Chuck Brown song in the car with the, you know, at your house with the windows up so your neighbors can hear it. That's how we protect the legacy of these artists, by making sure that the music continues to vibrate the communal airspace.
So one of the biggest artists in the history of hip hop, two we lost far too soon also, Biggie and Tupac.
Yes.
And I was close with someone who really saw them as just antisocial, cursing, misogynistic thugs, and they saw them in that one dimension.
Right.
I played for them Tupac's song, for her, Tupac's song, Mama. There was a big transformation from that song. Right. You remember?
I do.
You know the song that I'm talking about. So if I could have you to speak to the audience who might still remember Tupac as a thug, thug life, in the gang, and see him in that one-dimensional way, how you would suggest they observe him.
See, the thing about it is that we have to understand that the music that gets pumped through the radio it's one song on an entire album. Tupac was a gifted poet. Like he was very, he had some ideas. There were things, you know, his mother, what he went through, you know, what they went through together, her affiliation with the Black Panthers, and how she was, you know, she comes up in the space of being really about Black community and protecting Black community. You can't, I think the frustrating part is that there is a whole legacy of what Tupac brings to the table that just because you didn't hear on the radio doesn't mean it happens. And so I think there is this tendency to get caught up in, you know, language is a big part of it, and people are caught up in that language. But what I find fascinating is that the way that we, if you were to go to Japan or go to China or go to some other part of the world as a business traveler, say, you might have to get a little lesson on what is appropriate in those spaces. You would have to learn some of the cultural norms and some of the cultural expectations. When I did a trade mission to China, we learned how to give a business card. We had to school all of our business folks, like, look, this is how you do it. These are some of the ways in which to consider when you're interacting from a business standpoint. We don't treat Black culture like it's a value. And there's this tendency to do things like, oh, because we don't understand it, it's noise, turn it off. When you talk about Tupac, yes, there are some standout moments, but when you hear Brenda Had a Baby and you hear Dear Mama, that's an element of who he is as a person. And to think that all you get, that the only thing that can exist about him is what the radio plays or just the videos that you see, that it's denying somebody their whole humanity. And I think we have expectations of celebrities and music folks in general that are just unrealistic. They are human beings first and foremost. And so what I would say is go and listen to his entire catalog. You know, that's what I would say, because his entire catalog shows you the breadth of who he is as a person. And also, Nikki Giovanni has Thug Life tagged on the inside of her arm.
Yeah.
She loved Tupac. She thought that he was a poet. There are a lot of people that can speak to Tupac's humanity and how wide his scope is. Like, you can't just reduce it. I mean, it's one of those people who reads the Cliff Notes and says the book is stupid.
Again, what a great answer, because what I got out of that is when one says, look at his catalog, what you're talking about is look at his life.
Yeah.
You're talking about looking at his life.
Right.
And so those who sit home with the remote control and are looking at the lives of impoverished communities and judging them as inferior, as more violent and all the rest, that answer applies to those sitting there also. Look at their lives. At least appreciate their humanity.
It's the human aspect that we are always throwing. Like, we always, like when we're talking about black people, we always want to throw out the humanity. I'm like, you can't do that. Like, we're human beings. There's, first of all, for you to survive in any sort of situation, whether it be DC or Crenshaw, the reality is that you have to have a certain amount of just fortitude. Because there are a lot of people who type and click and talk all this stuff, wouldn't last a day. You know, but there's also the fact that people still smile, you know, people still, you know, love up, have babies, create joy. There's a whole bunch of joy and happiness in these areas that we are so quick to say, oh, they're violent, then they're not someplace we want to be. And I think we need to stop doing that. That's what oppression is all about. It's denying people their humanity.
We have another video, Nipsey, the sacrifice for growing. Let's take a look.
Sometimes you gotta take 2 steps back to take 10 forward. I mean, I gotta fall back from having my jewelry, you know what I mean, having my everyday money, riding around the hood on leather and chrome, smoking weed all day, calling the homies up. You got that for me? For sure. Going to pick up 200 here, 500 here, 1,000 here, and that's my day. I had to let go of that luxury, go back to being a young dude that was pinching every penny. Maybe he had $20 a day to spend, 10 on a sack of weed, 10 to eat, just so I could stay creative and work.
Tony, again, every single day, what we're talking about in your line of work, you're on the front, you're there on the front lines. What do our viewers and our listeners need to know? One, about your book and what it says. I mean, because it's certainly, it's a powerful piece of work. So we don't have a whole lot of time left, but let's talk about your book for a minute and what the message that you're trying to convey.
Yeah, so Slug is what I consider to be the most comprehensive the most comprehensive look at mass incarceration and its impacts. But a story of hope, how a young man could come from a community where you know, incarceration and premature death was normalized, and I was able to navigate my way through without going to prison, being able to be a college graduate, but not lose my credibility in community, and like Nipsey Hussle, never leave my community, did it all from Hanover Place, and showing the value in that when we make it through or we ascend, we don't have to leave, and you're there to help those around you, and you inspire those around you to show them that you can do something different. So Slug is a story about that. It's about hope, and it kind of forces America to hold a mirror up to itself and say, you know, because to show the humanity that exists in our communities, right? And why are our dreams stepped on? Why don't we reach our potential? And it's not just, we don't just wake up in the morning and say we want to break the law or we want to hurt somebody. What are the driving forces behind that inform those decisions? And I think my story, me not turning out like everybody else did, me having a father that's doing life in prison, and all the other men around me being gangsters or so-called gangsters, and me becoming who I am, if you can respect me, then you have to respect them. If you applaud me for my philanthropy or my service, that came from them. And so it's challenging the thoughts and the myths that's held about people that come from where we come from. And I think those that are from a community like mine will be empowered by it, but those that aren't will be educated by it. And, you know.
Chris, I see you nodding your head, and one of the things he says is challenge the myths. And so you would say to an uninformed viewership, the myths are what?
Well, it gets back to the point earlier about this one-dimensional thing, you know, making the other just existed in one sort of identity, if you will. I mean, why is Walt Whitman allowed to have multitudes, but a young rapper is not? You know what I mean? And also you see the influence of hip hop, I think, even on like the way that television dramas work today. We live in this golden age of TV where there are these complex characters who live multiple lives. It's like, why can't we listen to not only, you know, the musicians who are embodying that, but just the people who live around us. You know, everything, the world is complicated, and getting to know your neighbors is work, but it's work that needs to get done. I'm so glad to be on this panel today, just talking to everybody in the green room today. My whole perception of what's going on in our city and our world has broadened, and I'm just, I don't even want to talk anymore because I want to hear what everyone else has to say.
And we have 1 minute left. Today we paid a tribute to Nipsey Hussle. Here's another piece from the Final Call. It says, Nipsey's life, a hustle that motivates, resonates around the globe. How proud of you?
I am. I'm extremely proud. He's Eritrean. So the other element to this that we weren't able to touch on is that there's a huge, you know, hip hop world that lives on the continent. And oftentimes, like in the last 5 years or so, one of the things as things are growing is that people have always looked to Black American culture for inspiration. And so it's nice to have an Eritrean. It was nice to have an Eritrean who represented Eritrea, who was proud of that, sort of showing up in this way. And you
fully
know,
embraced and accepted.
Fully embraced and accepted, and as a bridge kid, which is what I call people like us who are born in one country but are culturally from another. So I'm Nigerian American. Having that bridge life where you are constantly having to manage all of these cultures, he did it. He did it seamlessly. And so I'm sad that I didn't know him more. I think the biggest sort of sadness I have is that it took him dying for me to know more about him. But I'm glad that I've learned so much, that, you know, learn as much as I have, and I'm going to support, you know, any way I can.
R.C. Davis said something akin to, when you bury Malcolm X, you're burying a seed that's going to grow many, many wonderful fruits. Today we honored our brother. That wraps us for this evening. For more information on this or any other program, go to WHUT.org. God bless and have a great evening.
Double up. I ain't telling no lies, I just, I ain't telling no lies, I just 5, 4, 3, 2, that's time. I got to you that money, my dreams come true, my life in diamonds. Who knew? Who knew?
This program was produced by WHUT, Howard University Television, and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.